Here's an interesting one. During the war, Civil War, Matthew Brady was probably one of the most prominent photographers. And it's the first time that war had been let at the average person at home doorstep, because they were seeing pictures of dead from battlefields, and additionally photographs of officers and soldiers like to get their images taken. And so it was somewhat of a novelty thing. Well, in 1865, at the end of the war, General Sherman and his army was coming to Washington to participate in the grand parade that was occurring down the streets of Washington to celebrate the end of the war. And Matthew Brady wanted to get a photograph of General Sherman and his staff, because he hadn't gotten one during the whole war at all. They just were never all together at one time. So he contacted Sherman, and Sherman said, "Well, I'm not sure that all of my officers are going to be here right after the parade is over." And so he got the group together, all except Francis P. Blair, the gentleman up here in the right corner. So what Brady did was he took a picture of those that were here in the far picture, and then he took the picture of Blair when he showed up, and then he took the two negatives and matched them together to make the composite view that he ultimately submitted to the newspapers. So that's probably the first Photoshop in history occurred after the war. This guy I consider to be probably the unluckiest man during the Civil War. His name's Wilmer McLean. Now Wilmer was a grocer before the Civil War started, and he was single, and he married a widow that had a plantation, and in a nice little town with a nice little creek flowing through it in the far picture. And as it turned out, that little creek was Bull Run. And the first battle of Bull Run was fought across the front yard of his property. After the battle was over, they utilized his house as a hospital, so pretty much made it uninhabitable for a time. So after the battle was over and the hospital was disbanded, Wilmer and his wife and two kids at that time moved back in, trying to get things rearranged. And about 8 months later, the second battle of Bull Run occurred, and so his house was utilized again. So Wilmer had had enough and decided that he was going to take his family and move further south. So he, at that time, that was now Wilmer, his wife, and his 5 children. They moved to a nice, quaint little town 100 miles south of where they had been, to the town of Appomattox Courthouse. So in April of 1865, General Grant utilized Wilmer McLean's front parlor to have General Lee meet him and sign the surrender papers. So the officers from General Grant's staff that were there realized the gravity of the situation, and so they took everything in the house. They took the 2 chairs that the general sat in, the tables that they signed the documents on. They cut up the wallpaper. They took the carpeting, the rugs, the draperies, you name it. So Wilmer comes back and finds that his house is no longer inhabitable, and they give the house up. He's lost his job. He was a sugar speculator for the Confederacy, had lost his job at the end of the war, and the house fell into disrepair, and then it was sold off at public auction in 1869. So I consider Wilmer McLean as probably the most unluckiest man of all during the Civil War. Now, my final one here, people ask me from time to time where I find the stories at, and this one kind of hits home, I guess, as to how these stories come about, how I find a lot of these. So one afternoon, my wife and I are standing in line at Drug Mart, and we're waiting to check out, and of course in the candy section right there, there's a whole box of these Necco wafers. And I look down at the blue band on it, and it says, since 1847. And I thought to myself, there might be a story here. So I did a little bit of research into it. And as it turns out, there has a Civil War connection in addition to an Ohio connection. So a gentleman by the name of Oliver Chase, who was born in Boston, Massachusetts, he was selling lozenges to apothecary shops that by mixing peppermint, brown sugar, and gum arabic together. And these round lozenges were designed to make it easier for patients to ingest bitter-tasting medications that they had infused into them. And so they were used to cure sore throats and bad breath and among other things. And but these discs had to be tediously cut by hand. And so Chase developed this patented improvement that would quickly cut uniform-sized lozenges in large quantities. And so he began to experiment a little bit with it and realized that he could probably make a business out of sweets from this original creation. So he's granted an additional patent for a machine that would pulverize and refine the sugar. And so he brought his two brothers into the company. They operated a factory in South Boston, and they perfected these lozenges into these pastel color wafers with that chalky consistency to them. Now, they were made from corn syrup, sugar, gelatin, gum, and food coloring. A roll of 24 wafers wrapped in wax paper and were called peerless wafers at the time. So as it happened, the Civil War breaks out, and not long after, the brothers went into business selling wafers as a perfect treat for soldiers because they did not melt in high temperatures, they didn't dissolve with wet, and they had a shelf life of 2 years. So it didn't break when they were mailed either, so they became wildly popular, and the soldiers called them hub wafers due to the fact that Boston was nicknamed at the time the Hub. So by 1864, they opened another factory in Chicago, and business began to boom for them. And Daniel Chase came up with a way to print messages on these round wafers, utilizing a vegetable dye. So it wasn't long before these wafers had notes on them like, "How long shall I have to wait? Please send me a lock of your hair by return mail. Married in pink, he will take a drink." And so there was a need to make these notes shorter, and so he arrived at "Be mine, kiss me, be true, and yours forever." So these new discs with the notes on them became known as motto wafers. Now, Chase and Company, they suffered a couple of setbacks. Both factories, as a matter of fact, the one in Chicago burned during the Great Chicago Fire, and then the year later, the Boston factory burned to the ground. They rebuilt both of those factories, and they continued to manufacture the sweets. As a matter of fact, the United States government in 1889 included the plain disc as a part of the soldiers' rations because they were said to improve morale, increase caloric intake, and improved endurance and health. Yeah, not so sure how far that really went, but anyways, the company started to introduce heart-shaped candies with printed messages on them called conversation hearts in 1901. So sometime later in the year, the Chase merged his company with Forbes, Haywood and Company and Wright and Moody to form the New England Confectionery Company, which became Necco. Now, Necco was in business all the way until 2007, they were sold to Investment Group, and by 2018, they went into bankruptcy and were about to close. However, in 2020, the Spangler Candy Company of Bryan, Ohio, the maker of Dum Dum lollipops, purchased the Necco brand and returned both the Necco wafers and conversation hearts to the market. Now, today, Necco wafer candy has the distinction of being the oldest continuously manufactured confection in its original form of any candy in the United States. It's interesting to note, this is something I had no idea of, is that the conversation hearts make up 40% of all Valentine's Day candy sales. They sell 8 billion individual hearts in the weeks leading up to the holiday. So one of these days, stop in the store and pick up the Necco wafers, and you can taste the exact same thing that the soldiers tasted back 160 years ago.